Chief Powell. I'm a PhD student here at UNC in Communication Studies Department. And thanks for coming to this panel, Mediated Inequalities. Today we have two presenters. Brett Lyszak from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill presenting on his paper entitled Equality in or Enhancement, Looking Beyond Accounts of Fairness in Pharmaceutical and Technological Conditions of Cognitive Enhancement. And then we have Cerise, go ahead, from the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, presenting on her paper Unpacking, Kony 2012, Connecting Media Literacy to Organized Activism to Engage Discussions of Equality and Agency. So first we'll start with Brett.
Right. So my presentation. What I'm presenting today is kind of like embarking on some unfamiliar terrain, both in terms of the object of my study and also the theme, equality, which is, I don't think I've ever actually directly addressed that, at least in a while, so it's really interesting. The topic of this presentation comes out of basic interest in looking at the way that technologies and broadly techniques not only impact our lives, but more particularly an interest in providing account of technological impact on and dimensions related to and on how we think, right? I'm doing a broader project on attention, and so I'm interested in looking at cognitive technologies, and the idea of cognitive enhancing psychopharmaceuticals is like a dimension that I'm unfamiliar with, and I'm using this as a way to like kind of feel some ideas, right? So, along with this, having been compelled in recent, I guess now years, by the idea of technogenesis, right? Kind of made popular recently by Stiegler and even presented by Catherine Hales recently in her new book. About the co-constitutive relation, always perhaps articulation of human and technics, right? And I'm interested in probing some of these examples and situations where a close articulation of human and techniques may make us uncomfortable, right? Now, debates about cognitive enhancement in particular, what are labeled as broadly as like smart drugs, right, psychopharmaceuticals, are part of a broader human enhancement debate. Now, one of the things I would like to forefront, and for me, as someone who identifies as doing media and technology studies, something is important for me to keep in mind as we look into these debates of cognitive enhancement, perhaps may help situate further how this presentation can be seen within media technology, kind of field of media technology studies, is that it's to cite, if not forefront, the worry or fear that human enhancement may alter human nature in some sense, and especially in a negative way. It's, I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but the kind of ideas made popular by Fukuyama, right, about how the possibility of biotechnology that might somehow alter human nature and move us to a post-human kind of stage of human history, where the engineering of humans to be smarter, faster, stronger, will undermine the human essence in some way, right? However we choose to define that. Now, for me, and again, perhaps this is shared by many of you, this argument lacks force because, we use technology to improve our state of being. The fact that we do that is perhaps the most human of human quality, right? Right? It's something that humans do, right? Medicine, transportation, human rights, would suggest that there's nothing post-human about extending the manipulation of nature to our own bodily processes. We have already altered human nature, right? We now live longer than we ever have before. And again, appealing to these ideas of technogenesis, right? That we have perhaps already been technical, right? On the other side, I am increasingly sympathetic to the kind of, idea of that that the ethics, of like this emergence of cosmetic neurology, what some people describe as, right, may in fact be a new kind of ethical terrain, right, in the project of human improvement. I'm increasingly being sympathetic to that. All right, so just put that at the get-go. What I'm presenting today is a result of looking at existing debates about cognitive enhancement by psychopharmaceuticals, right? With the theme of the title of the conference in mind, right? So in particular, my kind of perhaps, kind of hodgepodge methodology is I looked at, there are so many of these popular journal articles, right, written by journalists, circulating in kind of the mainstream popular press about psychopharmaceuticals, cognitive enhancement, right? There were like a number this week, right? New York Times had a big article on ADHD. New York Magazine had a article about modafinil this week. Salon even this week, right? So these are like, and they're every week, right? Right, like if you run across this stuff, right? So I'm like looking at the just a selection of some of these articles that are getting circulated kind of popularly, and looking at kind of the themes of, I don't know, fairness, equality, right, that are at stake in, the way that people are discussing cognitive enhancements, right, broadly considered, right. Along with this, I was interested in the wake of the Lance Armstrong kind of doping scandal, right? So my intention, and I did a lot of this, but was to position cognitive enhancing debates, arguments about fairness or equality broadly considered, against sports performance enhancing debates, right? And I did that, but most of what I present today, all right, I'm running out of time already.
No, keep going. You're fine.
All
You're
right.
fine.
Is going to be focused on the cognitive enhancing, and then I'll make those links and articulations to performance enhancing kind of debates of structured sports, right? Now, yes, right. So another preface, right? Right, very lot of preface. It's like, what are cognitive enhancers, right? This is like right. What are we talking about for the purposes of today? Anything pretty much that you have in mind, right? And this is going to be a critique because I realize, and as I'm looking at this stuff, it quickly becomes speculative, right? From looking at existing kind of conditions, right? Of say off-label use of Adderall, Ritalin, Concerta, are the kind of most popular kind of current kind of kind of situations of cognitive and use of psychopharmaceuticals that we perhaps may encounter, right? Both as students and as educators in the classroom, and also as professionals, right, that are engaging in dimensions of cognitive labor, right? Right. So, so what are cognitive enhancers, right? That it includes drugs that have been designed to address aspects of Alzheimer's, of dementia, of Parkinson's, right? To increase memory or something like that, right? Increased concentration and attention and focus, or general like kind of cognitive functions, right? Right. So you know, and I said the preface that this quickly falls into being speculative, and that's kind of where I'm going to I find myself as I'm trying to disarticulate certain themes having to do with broadly with equality and fairness, trying to disarticulate and kind of identify certain kind of significant themes that it quickly becomes kind of speculative, because a lot of these conversations are deal with the imaginaries, right? The kind of expectation that these advanced technologies, these advanced psychopharmaceuticals will, in some way, setting aside all the concerns about health and addiction and all that stuff, right, will perhaps someday go smarter, right, or something like that, something weird. Right. So and the other. Right. Okay. So equality equals, right? On the one side, cognitive enhancement already, right? Like kind of assumes, right? Enhancement, right? Right? Enhancement for what? Well, right? From what basic state, right? Enhancing what, right? Presumably some basic average normal condition that perhaps couldn't be accomplished without these methods of technological intervention, right? And it's the idea of healthy bodies using these rather than those in need of therapeutic, right? Right. So there are a number of themes, right? So as I look at these kind of arguments about broad-based, right, about equality and fairness, right? Certain themes that resonate are cheating, right? The concern about using these drugs constitutes cheating, right? And that is the major kind of articulation or link with kind of the performance sports enhancement debate, right? Other themes, so I disarticulate cheating, the theme of a concern about the undermining of achievement, right? Are we cheating ourselves? I look at the argument about the use of these cognitive enhancing technologies, whether currently or perhaps in some future state, as exacerbating inequalities, right? Already existing inequalities, and the theme of elision of difference, right? The flattening out of difference, and last but not least, the creation of a kind of coercive ecology, right? So just a few of these things, right? I ask my students, right? Do you consider, right, in the classroom, right, the off-label use, the kind of black market kind of use of using Adderall to cram for exams and write papers, right? I ask my students, do you consider using Adderall or, right, off-label use cheating? And right? Because, and none of my students do. I've never encountered anyone that actually considers this. Though, once we start to merge it to the kind of speculative kind of terrain, these all become hypothetical, right? So it's really interesting, right? So, all right. So the closest link to the sports debates is in terms of cheating. right? But what does cheating mean, right? And it's like you know, typically cheating means the breaking of rules or something, some set of guidelines, right? So if you're going to look at sports as a very isolated kind of sphere that most of us don't enter into, the kind of conditions of that kind of structurations of that sphere are perhaps very different than education, and then you know more broadly sense, right? So so with respect to cheating, right? What makes, say, use of these kind of technologies unfair? Typically, the arguments identify access, right? People may have unequal access to these, or there may be some like explicit or implicit kind of rules, right? Yes. So I will. Where am I? I am.
You're good.
All right. I'll perhaps kind of wrap some of this up. So the themes that I have are cheating, undermining and undermining achievement, which may or may not be strictly related, right? So another argument is that you know, these technologies would serve to effectively undermine achievement, right? So in going to college or grad school, right, involves effort and dedication. Whereas perhaps taking a pill involves neither, right? While on the face of it, taking a pill is easier than studying, this is not what is at stake here, and indeed, despite the, you know, arguably what people say as the diminishing standards of university education, it still is, and I'm pretty sure will always be, impossible to put a degree inside a pill. If you wish to understand Foucault or Negri or McGee, right, you still got to read the book. The best that can be hoped for is that perhaps there will be less effort. This is all perhaps on the speculative side, right? Now, say if a pill can make reading less of an effort, say it helps sustain focus and concentration, aided comprehension and/or memory, it may make education less of a challenge, but it could equally make education more of a challenge, and that we may allow people to go deeper into a subject area. You know, that choice would still remain. So to back up once again, suppose that cognitive enhancers would make it easier to learn the stuff you need for an exam, right? Boosting memory, right? This would only be unfair to people that don't have access, right, to these. Or what we could do, we could foreseeably, is to make these drugs kind of part of your school kit, right? Make even required school supplies, right? This can solve the problem, right? Right. And so it's interesting to think about the place of the calculator, right? With respect to all this, right? No one really cares about the use of a calculator anymore because the kinds of things that we assume or believe we are testing in exams in which calculators have used have gone beyond mere calculations, right? Indeed, that would impact the way that exams affected by, right? Right. This is all kind of speculative fun, right? Right. And so, you know, and the worry about use of cognitive enhancing technologies in an educational environment really supposes a kind of diminished like understanding of what education is or should be, right? Right, as not just if these improve memory, right? That education is in those cases or those exam cases, right? Education means just rote. Now we can imagine that actually being the case even today, right? Right. But like the calculator is required that we test for other things, so might the integration use of cognitive enhancers. This might likewise be seen as a consequence of the technology that because of our ability to use it effectively, we change the kinds of things that matter about the kinds of tests that we undertake, right? All right, so All right, so exacerbate inequalities is the other one. Another one, right? Another objection, right? That these developments will, in some sense, favor the rich, right? They'll make a person smarter. The rich will have access, right? Right, and then perhaps maybe the word opens it for the poor people or something, right? Right now, this is certainly the case that, right, that emerging, life-saving, right, like advanced technologies do tend to be adopted first by those with the greatest wealth, you know, and I don't know, it's perhaps bad to appeal to the status quo, right? That's kind of how the world currently is, right? The solution would be to either alter the social structure, right, so that wealth and power distributed in a more equitable fashion, or halt the research of these cognitive, right, technologies. What I just don't think is, you know, a viable solution, right? Right, we can follow that out, right? Right, so there's the idea of the trickle-down effect that, right, okay, 2 minutes, all right, right, that, right, the trick, right, it'll become cheaper for those, right, that don't have it, right, and this, of course, brings in the question of the critique of privilege, right, that who has the privilege to worry about any of this, right, about enhancing a very first world problem. We can imagine memes being circulated about this kind of stuff, right. Another theme is the Elijah of difference, which is another broad theme of equality. This is less in the like kind of circulating kind of conversation and debates, and more perhaps what I encounter in spheres, right? By my peers, right? The concern about you know, attempts at human enhancement will make us all the same, right? That rather than exacerbating human differences, they would perhaps move them over or something like that. You know, we have a lot of stuff on trade-offs, and the coercive ecology is another theme. That another argument is that attempts at human enhancement would be coercive. That to say, if there were a pill to make us smarter, we would eventually be forced, right? And whether directly or indirectly, right? You know, so as we don't fall behind everyone else, right? I have a lot more on these themes. These are just like, I'm trying to disarticulate some of these themes that have broadly, you know, kind of are circulating around a theme of equality and fairness with respect to cognitive enhancing technologies, psychopharmaceuticals, that I realize quickly become speculative, but I think it's a fun endeavor and it's good for like talking. I'm sorry.
All right, next over from Cerise.
As I'm getting started, I'll start by saying I'm still dealing with some sinus and allergy issues, and one of my ears is clogging and unclogging. So it's hard for me to tell if I'm yelling at you. So I will look for nonverbals instead of talking
I'll
loud.
be very expressive.
Okay, because I sound different in my head sometimes. So what I am talking about today is a project I'm working on with Kony 2012. I actually came to me from some of my students who I teach a class called Social Identity and Popular Culture and Media. And as I designed this class and recreated it, it actually allows me to bring in some of my other background areas coming from organizational communication, intercultural communication as well. Also, as a professor, I started to do more research with my graduate students, and now I'm moving to bring in undergraduates as well. Part of UNCG, for those of you who aren't as familiar with that school, they have a pretty good culture of instilling activism and engagement with the undergraduates. Part of that is rooted in our culture through being a women's college, having what they pride themselves on a key role in civil rights and integration. A little bit of a tricky history there, but I will not talk about that. and being the most diverse, predominantly white institution in the state of North Carolina, public university. So the students come in with this energy, with this engagement. If they don't, hopefully it's fostered by the curriculum. Part of what the students brought to me a year ago was they do presentation, the discussion was Kony 2012. So part of what I'm talking about is how the students put that on the table and how they're reacting to it. I also have a project where I talked about, and I have the questionnaires. Are you familiar with Kony 2012? What happened? What did you do, if anything? And then a year later, because they'll take like, and that was like April 2012. So now that we're in April 2013, how are you making sense of and processing this now? Particularly looking at it from the perspective of media literacy. So I envision this not to be a formal presentation, but to be more of a discussion. So I will be asking you for some help as well. So I'll start by saying, how many of you are asking, have heard of Kony 2012? Oh, that's great. Can you tell me a little bit about it? Anybody who just raised their hand? Anybody?
It was, I mean, as I understand, it's a little fuzzy now, but as I understand it, it was a viral kind of social media phenomenon whereby a whole bunch of money was raised in response to what I believe to be someone who was enrolling children in the Ugandan, some kind of Ugandan army rebel faction, if that's correct.
Yes, I'll talk to that. Any other want to add in here? Yes.
It was part of the Invisible Children project, and the man in charge of it eventually got arrested for indecent exposure.
You know what's funny? A year ago, that's what the students remember. That's what I got. I was questionnaires. It wasn't you reading around the news and I was like, not the Kony part. Anybody else? Yes, please.
One of the things that I remember getting talked about still is supposedly that was the most shared video in the history of sharing things in a virtual space. So it's kind of a landmark in terms of how quickly it became popular.
Thank you. We'll talk about the social media aspect. I actually have the video. I'm going to show you brief clips of it. So I've got my times, and I'll show you part of what I was looking at when the students brought it in, and I'll talk about some of their reflections and comments after I'll show you excerpts. Was one, it was very much of a landmark issue with social media and the use of social media in activism and engagement. And also looking at this notion of, from a social identity perspective, who we are and how we see ourselves, not only here, but in other parts of the world, and how that image got framed to take, this is what's happening over here in Uganda, and what is it that we here to do about it. And also, youth was a big part of it, where they were aiming not necessarily at people who consider themselves having a lot of social power, even money, but talking about how can you, where you are now, do something about this issue. So I will show you pieces of the clip to help you understand, one, how they open and frame the issue, how they frame Kony 2012, some of the devices that they use to generate identification with the audience, their goal of it, and then how they want people to act on it. And it actually has some interesting ideological pieces too.
Maybe just press pause for a second. It's trying to catch up with the rest of us. That's what's happening. Maybe try closing it and then reopening that file. Is it on the desktop?
It is.
Okay. Oh.
Oh, dang.
Computer.
If not, those of you who see it can do a dramatic interpretation.
There we go. There we go.
Right now, there are more people on Facebook than there were on the planet 200 years ago. Humanity's greatest desire is to belong and connect. And now we see each other. We hear each other.
Grandpa, I love you. I love you.
Why want to take a picture?
We share what we love, and it reminds us what we all have in common.
Dug out alive and well after 7.5 days.
If you believe in yourself, you will know how to ride a bike. Rock and roll.
Now, technically, your device is on. Yeah. Oh, that's exciting.
And this connection is changing the way the world works. Governments are trying to keep up.
Oh no, we got this the free door.
And older generations are concerned.
Many people are very concerned about tomorrow. They could get worse next year.
The game has new rules. The next 27 minutes are an experiment. But in order for it to work, you have to pay attention.
Jacob.
Joseph Kony, he has an army.
That's his son.
Okay? And what he does is he takes children from their parents and he gives them a gun to shoot, and he makes them shoot and kill other people.
But they're not going to do what he says because they're nice guys, right?
Yeah, they don't want to do what he says, but he forces them to do bad things. What do you think about that?
Sad.
I couldn't explain to Gavin the details of what Joseph Kony really does. Because the truth is, Kony abducts kids just like Gavin. For 26 years, Kony has been kidnapping children into his rebel group, the LRA. Turning the girls into sex slaves. And the boys into child soldiers. He makes them mutilate people's faces. And he forces them to kill their own parents. And this is not just a few children. It's been over 30,000 of them. And Jacob was one of those children.
So you see how they opened with the video, how they frame it, particularly within a social media context, moving to how they framed Kony 2012. I'll move to Kony himself. Then we're going to move to part of how they talk about voice with the kids.
To update real time of what's happening on a war zone 8,000 miles away.
All of this was funded by an army of young people who put their money toward their belief in the value of all human life. They gave a few dollars a month of what little they had to a program called Try, and proved that a bunch of littles could make a big difference. And as a result, the unseen became visible.
Action kit, and you can get bracelets that you wear. They can put up posters, which some of the students did. And then part of the point, they talked to some political leaders.
That's our objective, is to just shine a light on it.
If our goal is to get
They
Kony's
also
name
engage
known,
celebrities
the
in an
known
interesting
should
way.
join us. We are targeting 20 of the most diverse and influential culture makers to speak out about Kony and make him famous.
Oprah,
Mark Zuckerberg,
Ryan Seacrest.
Bono.
Then we're going after policymakers, the ones that have the authority to see Kony captured. They decide if the advisors stay or leave. So we need to remind them that in this election year of fighting and name-calling, no matter what side you're on, this is something we can all agree on. Have the authority to see Kony captured. For the night. This is the day when we will meet at sundown and blanket every street
This was
in
last
every
year,
city
April.
till the sun comes up. We will be smart and we will be thorough. The rest of the world will go to bed Friday night and wake up to hundreds of thousands of posters demanding justice on every corner. It's always been that the decisions made by the few with the money and the power dictated the priorities of their government and the stories in the media. They determine the lives and the opportunities of their citizens. But now there is something bigger than that. The people of the world see each other and can protect each other. It's turning the system upside down, and it changes everything.
We are living in a new world, Facebook world, in which 750 million people share ideas, not thinking in borders. It's a global community bigger than US. Joseph Kony was committing crimes for 20 years, and no one cared. We care.
We have reached a crucial time in history where what we do or don't do right now will affect every generation to come. Arresting Joseph Kony will prove that the world we live in has new rules, that the technology that has brought our planet together is allowing us to respond to the problems of our friends.
When it ends finally by bringing Kony justice, it should be celebrated like worldwide.
And I'll stop there, because part of the call to action is we'll do this tonight, we'll cover the night with all these posters, we'll use social media, and I mean, you and I was part of it. But we are people who want to help, will use social media to really get this message driven out there. So part of when the students brought this to me, and part of why I decided to study what was happening with them, is to actually look at how they were making sense of it. And part of the tools I give when we do study it from a media literacy perspective, so I'll show you that model. It's actually an older model, but in terms of giving them something nice that they can actually tangibly take part of, is one that it tends to resonate than other ones I've tried. Because it all starts with A's and it's nice and circular and it's so talk about with this, like a notion of this media, and I do have the clips I'm going to show you if you want to see them, or I'm going to email them to you. But this notion that there's something we can do with media from a critical perspective, applying this media, and if you're familiar with the Media Education Foundation, that's where I got this tool from. It's like Cass does some work with this, to do that video Tough Guys. So we've read some of his work in the class. But this notion of media literacy, circle of empowerment, and what people are trying to do, and what this video is trying to do in terms of awareness, and the name of the organization that actually put this video together is called Invisible Children. The part what they were doing to make that thing that's invisible visible, to look at access, analysis, advocacy, and activism. The activism part is what I was the most fascinated with, and particularly what it is people who either are or are not participating think they're doing as they're becoming part of this movement. Part of what the students wrestle with, particularly those who actually were part of it. Some of the students actually created their own Facebook pages. They would post their own screenings of it, and they actually had these action kits that were trying to do something to end this sense of what was framed to them as an injustice. But what was interesting when he asked them to analyze the content of what was happening, could not clearly articulate some of the issues that were raised in the video. Also had this interesting notion of past that April date, did not even know if what they did was effective or look it up to see if it was effective. But I did have this interesting notion, and here is where, if you're interested, there's a website called Kony 2012 where it actually talks about, so the organization itself does do a follow-up in terms of what has happened, but in terms of the people that they initially reached with that video, oftentimes these are students I had, did not go back to see. The agency part was I did something, now that part is over. The other piece I found, and by the way, Kony's been in the news just this week because they gave up looking for him again. So the story still gets pressed repeatedly, but the students, when I asked them this time, haven't been following it. Some didn't take action whatsoever, which is fine, it's a choice. But the other piece that is brought up is this notion of, can you really critically analyze or unpack what's happening? And they did this on different levels in terms of what they understood to be part of the issue with Uganda in 2012, but also this notion that's fascinating, moving to that activism awareness piece, is what you're doing by creating a Facebook page, or if you tweet it to somebody else, is that really activism? What does activism mean? So the notion that kind of got floated around is this term called slacktivism. That because I created a Facebook page, because I passed it on to somebody via Twitter, and because my favorite celebrities followed it, and I was somewhat surprised, even though when I actually thought about it, probably shouldn't have been, that one of the reasons that students got engaged with it was because their favorite celebrities were part of it, and because their friends who they trust sent to them on Facebook. It wasn't because the organization was reputable or credible, or because they thought that there was a real significant issue. It generally became because this is what's on Facebook, and these are my, and I was actually surprised that these students like George Clooney. I thought they were a little too young for that. George Clooney still resonates. So those are some ideas that I wanted to put on the table with them. And actually, students, which is perfectly great, challenged this notion of slacktivism, where one of my students actually said that slacktivism is the new activism, that we're past the civil rights marching in streets and signing petition type things. We can put and do petitions online, and if I share this information, if I do tweet about it, if I put it on Facebook, I've done my part in sharing this voice and helping making these invisible children visible, whereas others really were, you know, that's a kind of that is a slacktivist way of, now that you clicked on it or you tweeted about it, that's what your action starts and stops. The other thing that I was surprised by were some of the people that had the action kits and did the cover the night did not finish watching the video. They would just watch the first 5 or 10 minutes, get to the action kit part, and or put the link on their Facebook page. But there were a good number of students who had resonated with, never finished watching the video. And the last piece I saw, which when I was coming up, we call that subverting the dominant paradigm. Their way is much more jazzy or fun to access. Don't actually get to that point in the video that they stop at. In fact, they stop at different points. But yeah, 5 to 10 minutes in, something half an hour, which I don't think was that long. Some of them didn't even finish. Actually, the next time I teach this class, well, I just taught it, I just did this activity 4 weeks ago, and actually have them watch the whole video. So they have no choice. But generally when they were actually brought to my attention, they weren't finished watching it. The other thing I found interesting, particularly with the notion of what media does in terms of creating, this notion of if I create a Facebook page, does generate this sense of I created something versus I just passed on something to someone else, particularly if that something is something I never finished watching in the first place. The other problematic issues or things that come to the table, or you can ask me about too, is in terms of prior knowledge versus their ability to explain to somebody else. Surprisingly, there wasn't a lot of this generated conversation. It stayed in that social media space of one person did have a screening where she watched the video with their friends, but they would just tweet it, watch it, or put it on their Facebook page. And then in terms of identifying clear action steps that they were asked to do, and then what that cover the night was supposed to do was also a disconnect. In terms of, yes, you generated awareness, but now what? So benefits, I would say. Positively is it did generate this sense of, I have made the world a better place. I'm doing my part to make the world better, particularly for those other people who I never knew existed. So creating that type of awareness, but also in terms of looking at it from problematizing a bit, is this newer way of trying to act or organize over social media, is that the new activism, or is that more a sense of what people are nicknaming slacktivism? And I'll stop there. You want me to close anything down, or?
I think we can keep it up. I think we'll be fine. Well, thank you to both of our presenters for really, getting at the ways in which technology not only enhances us, our biological nature of our humanity, but definitely the social, the inherently social aspect of what it means to be human. So we'll go ahead and open up to questions, and then, we'll go with, remind me of your name again?
Justin.
Justin, and then Chris.
My question is for Brett, is that right? Okay. So I approached your presentation from a very unique perspective in that I have 9 years of retail pharmacy experience. So I pushed pills for quite a while. And I guess I'm not going to say that I'm concerned so much as I'm curious about putting these narratives that you've given to us about, what do you call it, like enhancing human performance with the narratives of correcting human deficiencies. Because I don't know that we can really talk about either or without both. Does that make sense? So where I'm going with this is, the experiences that I've seen with folks coming into the pharmacy and getting things like Adderall, Concerta, Ritalin, you name it, is that it's almost a dependency, like they need this thing to function because without it they are not living up to normal, quote-unquote, normal expectations of what human performance is supposed to look like, as opposed to people who use it off-label, as you say, to enhance human performance. And so I feel like there's this kind of tension then between folks who use it to get ahead and folks who, I guess, use it to catch up. And so how do you see the two informing each other? Because I think that those are not necessarily conflicting cultural discourses, but I think that they're inextricably tied together.
Yeah, they are absolutely inextricably tied together in that, the development of right, the kind of identification of kind of symptoms that these are designed to address, or right, there is. I mean, I don't know initially at the get-go how to disentangle this kind that so quickly this falls into critiques about the kind of over-prescription, right, perhaps of right. So I don't even know where to start with a lot of that. I see that as a significant tension. I might have to pause on that. I don't know if that was yeah.
I think then we'll bounce to Chris and then Elaine and
I've actually got a question for both of you. I mean, Brett, I'll push you on that a little further. I mean, is this...
Well, if you put a pause on that.
He put a pause on it, fine. But I've got a question for you, Miss. I mean, and people who know me here know that one of my pet peeves about kind of social media and social activism, and I'm wondering if your students kind of get this or if this is discussed in the experiment, is when people basically think it's some kind of revolutionary or activist move, which I think certainly can be argued it is. What everybody, to my consternation, usually forgets is, they kind of